when someone like me talks about the war in Europe, people sort of, wait a minute, we're not at war. I would offer that yes, we are. The enemy gets a vote. Mr. Putin is fighting on a European landmass, and now he has introduced Asian troops into a war on the European landmass.
The news, when we look at, I suppose, the last year, this year, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, it looks like Russia is doing better. It looks like the incursion by Ukraine into Russia is faltering. It looks like Russia is taking more land than it has done in a while. Before we get into ramifications of where we are geopolitically, what do you make of the state of the war in November 2024?
So, Stig, I don't believe that I totally agree with the way you characterize it. Russia is slowly gaining some ground in the east, but in one fell swoop, Ukraine gained more land inside Russia than Russia has gained in Ukraine all year long. So, if we're just talking about the hectares that have been conquered, Ukraine has had a better year than Russia. But I don't think we should measure the war in either of those ways. I think that clearly the war is beginning to wear on both sides. Both armies are having a hard time fielding the appropriate amount of men, trained men, and the Russian army is hurting so bad that it's had to bring another country into the war. It's asking North Korea to help it regain Russian land. That would be like us asking you in the United Kingdom to come to the United States and defend our homeland. So Russia is having a tough time as well. And both countries are suffering mightily. Of course, Ukraine is suffering because Russia is unable to really do what we call a counter force fight, meaning they don't have the precision and the organization to really fight the Ukrainian army well. So they are doing a counter value fight, and Russia is just simply waging war on the people of Ukraine, on the civilian infrastructure, on the energy infrastructure, et cetera, and trying to essentially disassemble the country of Ukraine because they can't really find their way towards a defeat of the Ukrainian army. And so it's a tough place right now. It's really a study of frustration because neither side has been able to establish any sort of air superiority. The Russian Navy has been run out of the North Black Sea, and the Russian Air Force, while still large and one would think capable, has been unable to do some of the most basic things we ask an Air Force to do. So it's a really frustrating kind of war.
And in such a frustrating kind of war, things can presumably escalate or change quickly, particularly when you have some of the personalities involved, starting with Putin. You then throw in America's decision to allow US long-range missiles to be fired into Russia. There's the prospect of storm shadows coming from the United Kingdom. And then you have Putin's posturing and threatening in return. Do things change? I mean, these weapons have been fired. The US weapons have been fired. We've had Russian people on our program saying, people close to Putin saying he may retaliate. He may retaliate with nuclear force. Could this escalate further? Where could it escalate further before we even talk about Donald Trump marching on the horizon in January?
So if we are academically honest, the answer to your questions are yes, he could escalate. But you asked an interesting question a moment ago when you said, do things change? One thing that has not changed is Mr. Putin is threatening again with some sort of a nuclear issue. As I said a minute ago, Russia's army has largely failed. They've been fighting for 10 years and they still haven't taken Ukraine. This war's been going for 10 years and they still haven't taken Ukraine. Russia's Air Force has failed to establish air superiority, et cetera, et cetera. What has not failed, though, what has succeeded wildly for Mr. Putin is his war of intimidation, his war of words. Since the beginning of this war, he's every time he is threatened or things aren't going well, either he or Lavrov or somebody at the top of the infrastructure of policymakers in Russia bring some new nuclear issue to the table. We're dropping out of this treaty. We are going to move nukes into Belarus. We're going to lower our nuclear threshold. We're going every time it's something new to keep saying nukes, nukes, nukes.
And it kind
Because
of works.
we told him in the beginning of the war what we didn't want and what we were afraid of. We said we're afraid of this war going nuclear and the war widening. So Mr. Putin threatens us with that constantly. And so you asked, has anything changed? That has not changed.
And has that worked? Because ultimately, Biden decides to send these missiles in 2 months before he finishes being president. Starmer is still thinking about whether to do Storm Shadow. It kind of has worked, hasn't it? Because if all those decisions had been made 2 years ago,
that's exactly what I said. His war of intimidation has succeeded wildly. His physical kinetic war with his military has largely failed. 10 years, a world superpower has been trying to beat Ukraine, and they haven't done it. But what they have done, as you just mentioned, they have forced Western policy with their threats. We in the West are deterred. Just one more just point on that. The thinkers of old age, the Clausewitz, the Jomini's, the Sun Tzu's, they all agree on a few things. Two of them are take and hold the initiative, seize and hold the initiative. We haven't done that. We're reacting to Russia. We've been reacting to Russia for 10 years. The second thing they say is deter your enemy and do not allow your enemy to deter you. So in two of these famous axioms of these thinkers that we study in the war colleges, in baseball language, we are 0 for 2.
Yeah.
We are 0 for 2.
And how helpful is the phrase in all of this of World War III? Because Ukrainians say to us, there is World War III because you've got Russia attacking in Europe, supported tacitly by China, openly by North Korea. This is World War III. Russia threatens World War III. And yet World War III is, again, one of the things that we just don't want any part of whatsoever. So is the phrase World War III a kind of weaponized phrase in itself?
Of course. Again, this is a part of the war of intimidation. Another one of the axioms of those old dead guys we just talked about is that your enemy gets a vote. And while we in the West want to think we're not at war, when someone like me talks about the war in Europe, people sort of, wait a minute, we're not at war. I would offer that, yes, we are. The enemy gets a vote. Mr. Putin is fighting on a European landmass, and now he has introduced Asian troops into a war on the European landmass.
So this is a world war in that sense, isn't it? I mean, that's one definition of a world war. You have multiple actors fighting on a continent where both sides are well supported by superpowers. That is one definition of a world war.
So I'm not going to lend my name to that because then that would be the headline that the former Sakier says we're in a world war. But the bottom line is there is a war on the European landmass, and it is involving nations from outside of Europe.
Yeah. Just finally, Phil, what happens when Donald Trump enters stage left? I mean, we hear a lot of stuff from his people. He's going to end the war. He's going to end the war in 24 hours. We have no idea how possibly he would do that when you have two entrenched enemies like we do here. What's the next change that happens? Is that even predictable?
Well, if you have someone who walks into your studio and says, "I know what Donald Trump's going to do," turn your mic off and put your pencil down. Because the only person that knows what Donald Trump is going to do is Donald Trump. Now, he has made some statements about ending the war in one day. And I think that his team is beginning to understand that's not going to happen. In fact, I think Mr. Putin has now seized on that fact and said, aha, I have the upper hand because he will have to come to me to meet my terms to end this war in one day. And we are told, although I don't take me as the source, but we are told that in their conversation, former President-elect Trump told Mr. Putin, do not accelerate this war. Do not begin new and drastic measures in this war. And what has Mr. Putin answered? He fired the most missiles and rockets in one night into Ukraine ever, and followed up with a second drastic night of missiles and rockets. And then he has introduced, some say, over 10,000 North Koreans into the fight. So Mr. Putin has sort of, if we are to assume that actually the conversation was had that we are led to believe, Mr. Putin has made his vote, and that is, he's not listening to the next president of the United States, and he's taking his own path. I would tell you that in my opinion, will not go well with him, with the president-elect. I think the president-elect wants to try to get to a quick resolution of this war, but if he finds he not only doesn't have a cooperative opponent, that he has a belligerent opponent, then the former president, the soon-to-be president of the United States, is very much a New Yorker, and I think the New Yorker in him will come out.
Yeah, well, that's the great unknown at the minute, as you say. Phil, what a fascinating conversation! It's so good to speak to you. We always learn something. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
All right, thank you. Good to see you.